In the last lesson, we looked at how we can structure our basic Bootstrap elements, so adding in a class of container or container fluid. And I did mention that we're going to look at the grid option. So before we look at the grid, it's important to understand the way that Bootstrap works. So we see that Bootstrap sets different breakpoints within our web page. And then whenever we hit the minimum width, then we add in different styling. So this is how essentially Bootstrap works. And we can see that whenever we go into the source code of Bootstrap. So I'm going to just open up that sidebar and we'll take a look at the Bootstrap library here, and we see that we've got essentially quite a lot of information that gets added in on these different breakpoints. And you can see the breakpoints right within the Bootstrap CSS file. So we said we've got minimum width of 544, and whenever we hit that minimum width, then the card columns change, the breadcrumbs, and a whole bunch of stuff changes. So we see that on different breakpoints, we've got another minimum width there, so the Jumbotron, and we are going to look at that upcoming different alerts. So there's a lot of different sizes depending on, a lot of different stuff happens depending on what the size of our screen is. So we see that with Bootstrap, right out of the bat, they have some basic breaking points. So they have a minimum width of 544. So this is the smallest size. So this is where the adding in the Bootstrap class on the small classes is going to take effect. We've got medium, and we've got large, and we've got extra large. So this one is new here for larger devices with Bootstrap 4. So previously, if you're using Bootstrap and if you want to be 3 and 4 compatible, just stick with the small, medium, and large. If you're ready for Bootstrap 4, then jump into extra large classes. So we can see a better example here when we look at within the Bootstrap, and we see that they've got some information here on the Bootstrap styling. So essentially they've got three different columns here, and the way that this works is that as we hit the different breakpoints, these columns will behave differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you how this is going to work within our example. So we're going to keep that main container, and I'm going to add in, so it already had container there, so I'm going to add in that, and let's go take a look at our source file. So now when we update it, and I'm going to shut this down here. Actually, I do need it still open because I want to adjust the different sizes. So we see that whenever we open it, we see that one of 3 columns, and as we hit the breaking point, so the breaking point itself, after we hit on a small, because so 544 is our breaking point, so we see that column dash SM dash 4, when we hit that SM size, then we're going to see something different happen. So let's look at as we're adjusting, and we see as we hit that breakpoint there, the columns are going to change, and they're actually going to stack one on top of the other. So I'm going to add in a red border around there so we can better see it. So we see that now the columns are all separated, and once we hit the breakpoint, they're going to stack. And the way that we look at Bootstrap, essentially it's a 12-column layout. So if these were SM1s, and I'm going to make this one 10, and the reason that I'm making this one 10 is because Bootstrap works on a grid size of 12, so it always has to be divisible by 12. Or best practices would be to divide it by 12. And of course, if you get familiar with Bootstrap, you can make adjustments to that as well. So it doesn't always have to be 12. But for the basics and to get started with it, think of it as a grid of 12. So you've got 12 separate columns with your content, and you can divide that column in any way you want. So we can even, if we want to add in another one, so 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So this one should be 9 to take full width all the way across our web page. So let's check this out now and see how this works. And of course, the text within there is not going to be correct, but we see that I need to actually add in a separate class in there. So maybe I can just do it for the div there so we can see the difference between the different sections. So we've got, essentially, we see all the different columns here. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So these are all the 1 width columns. and then this is the 3 width columns. And we can see as we adjust, then they stack. So the idea here is to use the different breaking points and adjust how your web page gets presented. So I'm actually going to update this to 4 columns, because just to be correct on how many columns we're actually going to have. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, that's good for small sizes, but what if I wanted to set a breakpoint of a medium size? So I can set one breakpoint there, medium, this one medium, and I'm going to stick these ones to the small. So what's going to happen here is that it will still work. So we're going to still have these breaking points, but it's not going to work as you would expect it. So once we're at a large size, we see we still have all of that structure that we've built out. So none of these classes are actually doing anything at this point. It's just dividing it out into the 3, and until we hit the breaking point, that's when it's going to take action. So we've got essentially all they're doing right now is specifying how much space it needs to take. So when we hit the first breakpoint here of 768, we can see that now they adjust. But we don't have that nice, neat presentation that we want, what we would normally expect, because we've got all of these columns. So we do have to add in additional classes in order to structure it properly. So again, thinking in values of 12, let's take a look at this and see how this works out. So the SM1 is adds up to 12, and now we need to take care of this value. So we can do something where we've got the MD1, and maybe let's update this to 4, and for MD we're going to have a value of 6 there. And as long as you're sticking with all of the different sizes, all of the different breakpoints, having that value that we are adding up to 12, it'll present nice and neatly. So we can see that even at the larger breakpoints, so as we get larger sizes, we can see that we're on the medium size, so anything above the medium, so on the large and extra large sizes, anything above that 768 width, we can see that according to our source code here, we've got medium is 4, medium 1, 1, and 6. So we see that roughly 50%. We've got 50% on this side with these 3 and 50% with that. And this is the sizing that it's going to take whenever we're larger than that size. But as soon as we break that medium size, we move to the next level. So we take the values here of the SM size. So this is between SM and the medium size. This is how it's going to stack. So now we're using 1, 1, 1, and 9. So we see it getting represented there. And as we shrink it down, once we shrink below that small size, we see that they automatically stack there. So we see that we've got complete stacking there. And also with the really small size, okay, you're probably thinking, okay, well, what if I don't want them to stack? So that's where we would use column excess. So there's one other there, and then this is where we can specify that maybe we want this to be column excess and give it a size of, maybe we want them all to take up the same amount of space. So there's a value of 12 divided by 4, because we've got 4 columns. So we can set them all to a size of 3, and we see that no matter how much we shrink it, we're always going to have those 4 columns there. So essentially this is how the grid works, and it does take some time getting used to it, but think of it as always values of 12 is the full width. So always make sure that as you're making these adjustments that you are adjusting and accommodating for the different sizes of screens and how you want to represent your content in different size screens. And if you're actually not worried about the different representations, you can just set the different breakpoints at XS3, and then you know that nothing is ever going to adjust. It's always going to be those 4 columns. If you want to break at SM1 or SM size, then this is something to keep in mind, because that makes it a lot more mobile friendly, because generally once you start shrinking down, we see we've got these columns overflowing and so on. So we don't really want that to happen. So this is one of the reasons why we would create these different breakpoints. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive deeper into the Bootstrap structure, and I'm going to show you some of the really amazing things that you can do with Bootstrap. But make sure before you move on to the next lesson that you do understand the basics of this grid system. Try it out for yourself, play around with the different styling, and see what you can get done with Bootstrap and the grid system.